It's 1945. The Allies have defeated Nazi Germany and World War II is finally over. But what if the end of the war wasn't the beginning of peace? What if it sparked a whole new conflict, one that changed the course of history forever? At the end of World War II, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was deeply suspicious of Soviet intentions, believing the war might not truly be over. As Stalin's Red Army advanced through Eastern Europe, Churchill worried that the communist expansion would continue unchecked. To counter this imminent threat, Churchill tasked his top military planners to devise a top-secret strategy called Operation Unthinkable. This was a bold and risky plan to launch a surprise attack on the Soviet Union to halt their dominance in Eastern Europe and restore the balance of power. This plan called for American and British troops, along with more manpower from reactivated Wehrmacht personnel that initially fought for Hitler's Germany, to launch an all-out assault on the Soviet position. In our timeline, Operation Unthinkable never went beyond the planning stage. It was deemed too dangerous and logistically impossible. But it forces us to ask, what if it had happened? Would it have been the continuation of World War II, or the start of a whole new global conflict? Today we dive into this alternate history, imagining the tactical decisions, battlefield strategies, and geopolitical consequences of Operation Unthinkable. Stay with us as we explore the war that might have reshaped the world forever. In this alternate history, on July 1st, 1945, Operation Unthinkable begins. The Western Allies launch a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. Their mission was to push the Red Army out of Eastern Europe and take back key territories like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and parts of Germany, which the Soviets had occupied during the final days of World War II. Since Winston Churchill believed that Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union was the next big threat to global peace, he wanted to strike before the Soviet Union grew too powerful to defeat. Key leaders like General George S. Patton supported this idea, arguing that the Red Army was vulnerable after years of fighting Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front. But this plan wasn't without risks. The Soviet Union had a massive army with over 11 million soldiers stationed across Europe. While the Allies had a stronger air force, advanced weapons, and better strategists, they faced logistical challenges and needed to coordinate troops from different nations. We can expect the Allies to launch their first attack on Dresden, a key Soviet-controlled city in eastern Germany. Dresden was crucial for the Soviets as it was a major supply hub, handling the transport of troops, weapons, and resources to the front lines. It was also the headquarters of the First Ukrainian Front, a powerful Soviet force with over 500,000 seasoned troops, hundreds of tanks, and a staggering arsenal of artillery and heavy guns under the command of General Ivan Konev. The attack begins with the Allies trying to cripple the Soviets logistically through heavy bombing campaigns. The Allied B-29 bombers would focus on targeting Soviet supply depots, railroads, and communication hubs. Under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, and General Omar Bradley, a coalition of British, American, and remobilized German troops launch a spearhead assault on Dresden, aiming to overwhelm the city. However, delays quickly emerged. Soviet forces resisted fiercely, using their well-established defenses to slow the Allied advance. Bad weather could further disrupt the bombing runs, reducing their effectiveness. The logistical challenges of coordinating Allied and German forces also caused setbacks, with many German units being relegated to non-combat roles due to mistrust within the Allied ranks. Despite these difficulties, the Allies eventually overwhelmed Dresden's defenses. However, this victory came at the cost of time, allowing the Red Army time to fortify other key positions. After Dresden, the Allies pushed towards the Oder-Neisse line, a natural barrier making the edge of Soviet-occupied Poland. Crossing this line was critical, but it brought them face-to-face with some of the Red Army's elite divisions. This phase of the campaign would be marked by intense tank battles. General George S. Patton, known for his aggressive tactics, would have led Allied armoured units in a series of lightning-fast attacks. Sherman and Cromwell tanks clashed with Soviet T-34s and IS-2 heavy tanks. However, the Soviets had prepared a defense-in-depth strategy, with multiple fallback lines to absorb the Allied advance. Even when the Allies breached one defensive layer, they faced another, heavily fortified position further east. Cities like Wrocław and Poznań became battlegrounds for brutal urban warfare, where the Allies faced sniper fire, booby traps, and ambushes. The Soviets also could have further deployed anti-aircraft defenses and their own air force, creating a challenge for Allied bombers. Dogfights between Soviet Yak fighters and Allied planes over Polish skies added another layer of complexity to the campaign. Although Soviet resistance would be fierce, we can expect the Allies to overwhelm them in these battles due to more advanced military weaponry and armor. Meanwhile, the push to capture Warsaw, Poland's capital, becomes a turning point in the campaign. Warsaw was more than just a strategic objective, it was a symbol of Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe. Churchill hoped that liberating the city would inspire Polish resistance and encourage uprisings across Soviet-occupied territories. But Stalin was ready. Warsaw was fortified with tanks, artillery, and defensive barricades. He also ordered scorched earth tactics, destroying infrastructure to slow the Allies. The Polish resistance, while eager to fight, was hesitant due to memories of being abandoned by the Allies during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. The battle dragged on for weeks, turning into a grinding urban conflict. Allied forces captured some outer districts of the city, but the heavily fortified center remained under Soviet control. Civilians suffered heavily, caught between two warring armies. As the Allies tried to push deeper into Eastern Europe, Stalin responded with overwhelming force. Declaring total war, he ordered the mobilization of millions of troops and ramped up production in Soviet factories. General Georgy Zhukov, one of the Red Army's most brilliant commanders, was tasked with leading the Soviet counteroffensive. Zhukov's strategy was simple but effective: overwhelm the Allies with sheer numbers and attack their stretched supply lines. Soviet forces launched a massive counterattack near Krakow, cutting off Allied reinforcements and forcing them into a defensive retreat. Stalin also employed psychological warfare, using propaganda to demoralize Allied troops and stir dissent within their ranks. The Battle of Krakow became a major Soviet victory, halting the Allied advance and marking the beginning of a protracted stalemate. By winter of 1945, both sides were locked in a war of attrition. The Allies struggled to resupply their forces, while the Soviets relied on their vast manpower reserves but faced mounting casualties and shortages. Freezing temperatures and snowstorms made movement difficult, and disease spread rapidly in the trenches. Stalin's propaganda machine worked to exploit divisions among the Allies, highlighting the high human and economic costs of the war. Meanwhile, political tensions rose within the Allied leadership, with public support for the war waning in both the United States and Britain. Operation Unthinkable came to a grinding halt as both sides realized a decisive victory was out of reach. With the Allies holding parts of Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe, uneasy diplomacy became the only path forward. In this alternate timeline, the Iron Curtain might have stretched deeper into Eastern Europe, or perhaps Soviet counteroffensives could have pushed the Allies back further into Western Europe. The truth is, no one knows what the end of such a conflict would look like.